Hey everybody, tonight our topic is disaster planning. Really quickly, we just have a couple of housekeeping items. We'll do a Q&A at the end, so just hold everything until we're done with the presentation. We are recording this session and I will email out a link to the recording later this week. And then please stay muted. We've got a bunch of people here tonight and just keep your microphone off until the end when we do Q&A. So Backlog's the name of my company. We're putting on this webinar. We do everything from archival needs assessments to policy writing. And I'm Emma. I founded Backlog in 2021. If you ever work with Backlog, I am the person you talk to. And I travel a lot for it. And now I'm going to hand it over to Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I work with Backlog and I do both work as well as these webinars for Backlog, and I also have a day job in Rhode Island. And today I'm going to be going over disaster plans. So if you go to the next slide. So as an overview of what I'm going to be talking about during this webinar, there's going to be three parts. It's the basic of what is a disaster plan, and then I'll go over the 4 stages, and finally I will share with you all some really great resources that I highly recommend you look at. So next slide. All right, to start with, what is a disaster plan? Well, a disaster plan is a plan of action that would be put in place when an emergency occurs. The breadth and depth of the plan will be based on the risk levels of your institution and the attainable actions you will be able to fulfill in the event of an emergency. A disaster plan is part of something called emergency management, which the NEDCC, which is the New England Document Conservation Center, describes as encompasses all the activities undertaken by an institution to prevent, prepare for, and respond to an emergency involved in its collections. Planning focuses on both the collections themselves, both those physical and digital, as well as for continuity of operations. Next slide, please. When you're thinking about disaster plan, there are 4 stages that you will be going through for this planning: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So let's get into it. Next slide. Stage 1 is mitigation and risk analysis. During this stage, it is all about identification. It's both about knowing what possible risks there are, but also how likely they are to happen. Knowing what event is more probable than others will help you prioritize which type of disasters to focus on more over others. This is key when you don't have a lot of time or dedicated budget to creating your disaster plan, which don't we all have to deal with that. The process of identifying risks and then ranking them is what is called risk analysis. And you can look up great resources online for helping you conceptualize and visualize your risk analysis. I had pulled this matrix here that you see on the screen from an online disaster planning website created by Michael Robinson and Sean Noonan. This matrix and other resources mentioned in this webinar today will be shared at the end of this webinar, and links will be included in the online recording on YouTube later. Continuing to think about this, every place is different, and the likelihood of your institution being impacted by various variables is unique to you. To help you determine your own risk levels, think about where your institution is located. Is it near open bodies of water? Are there frequent storms in the area? Are you located near a fault line? Are there frequent crime in your area? Do you suffer from wildfires? These questions will help you know what environmental factors may lead to an incident. Writing down these concerns, as well as locations of emergency systems, such as your fire suppression control box, will help you easily reference and skim for needed information when an incident arises. But you also have to think about internal hazards, not just the external. What is the status of the maintenance of the building? Is there a history of leaky pipes or clogged gutters? What is the status of the basement? Is it typically humid and wet? How are the collections storage? Are they on the floor? Are shelves screwed to the walls? What are the fire protection systems look like? Do you have particular valuable items that could go for high price on the black market? Do you have any digital backups of your records or inventories? All these possible factors can be ranked, and once you know what is most likely, you can then put more effort into mitigating those higher risks. But to help you decide, this part is not just a passive remembrance of issues that may have happened in the past. You also have to actively do your research about the conditions of your locale. Walk around your building, even to the places you don't typically have a reason to go to. See what is in disrepair. Additionally, when ranking these potential items, make sure that you don't make everything a high priority. Yes, anything can happen, but making all risks a high priority diminishes your ability to address the most pressing issues sooner. Try to keep your most critical risks to 3 to 5 risks. It is once these risks are addressed and you feel prepared to face them that you can then go down the risk totem pole and do the next highest risk. Next slide. Stage 2, this is preparedness. This next stage is where you educate yourself about what to actually do when an emergency occurs. Depending on what type of emergency you are facing will change how you approach addressing the issue. But having a base knowledge of what to do and how to do it will help you act quickly and effectively in those moments. This is also when you are actually going to write your disaster response plan, which is the most time-consuming and labor-intensive step. Well, up until you actually face an unexpected disaster. If possible, this stage should not be undertaken alone, but should be done via a committee. If you are at a small institution where you are forced to tackle this as one individual, make sure you have fellow staff stakeholders who can at least provide insights and feedback to your preparedness plan. By having a committee, it not only distributes the workload, it also encourages education and communication throughout an institution. Additionally, getting first responders involved in the committee, even for just one meeting, can help you not only get in front of those first responders so that they know who you are, but it also builds rapport and they can provide critical information and education that may be unique to their particular department. There are many parts of a disaster response plan that you should write, and you should touch upon all of them at least a little. The key to writing the plan itself is to balance the need of the depth of information with the need to be able to quickly skim and easily read the most important pieces. This is where your risk analysis information comes in super handy. By knowing what is most likely to occur, you can beef up those procedures while keeping less likely incidences simple and broad. The components of the plan typically include an introduction, objectives, supplies, response plan, salvage priorities and procedures, long-term recovery plan, and appendices. You can find many example plans online. There's also the free resources from the Getty Conservation Institute called Building an Emergency Plan, which you can see here on the screen, which I highly recommend. Now, let's actually dive into the individual sections of the emergency response plan. Next slide. To start with will be the introduction and objectives. This is where you will explicitly write how to use the plan, how it has been and should be distributed, as well as updates and iteration information when future updates are done. Writing when the plan was last updated will help you keep track of when to review it, and you should plan to review it annually. This section should also lay out who needs access to this plan and timelines for distribution and training, so the document doesn't become a one and done thing, but it is iteratively updated and reviewed, and there is a plan for refreshing staff's mind on the pertinent information and training. In this component of the plan, you can also write your objectives, where you would write out what emergency scenarios are addressed in the plan and why. You should write out which scenarios are highest priority and the reasoning behind those decisions. Having your risk analysis here in the concrete writing will help you and your future colleagues remember or learn and understand why certain decisions about priorities were made. Next slide. The next section in your disaster response plan is to have a list of items that are specifically set aside for emergency purposes. They should not be used for daily use, but should be stored separately. Typically, items can include PPE masks, nitrile gloves, antibacterial wipes, safety goggles, sheets, plastic bags of various sizes, paper towels, lanterns and flashlights, scissors, utility knives, ladders, tape, extension cords, pencils, trash bags, boards, and so on. I included some images here that came from the Harvard Library, which I highly recommend you look at because this is a really good starting point for what institutions typically need in a disaster scenario. At my institution, we ensure that these supplies are stocked and kept separate from our daily supplies by putting them actually in a big trash bin, the kind you would roll out to the curb, with the label disaster supplies on it. This way we know not to ever pull out some paper towels because we ran out from it. We always keep that separate. Next slide. The next big section of the plan will be the response plan. And this section has multiple subsections, so that you can put them in any order you please, but I'm just going to go over them in this order that I arbitrarily chose. You should have emergency procedures. These include evacuation procedures and training for staff so that they know who to call when and for what reason. This should include when to call the authorities, when to call internal help, when to evacuate versus stay and mitigate the issue, and when to find shelter, and so on. You should also have an emergency call list. This will include all local emergency responders and organizations that specialize in salvaging. Not only should you have this list of numbers that are external, you should also proactively reach out to each of them and establish a relationship. Ongoing communication will ensure that everyone is on the same page and knows what their responsibilities are during that hectic emergency. This outreach is also an opportunity to explain to them who you are, what do you do, and why your institution is important to the community. Specific groups you should have on this list include local first responders, a temporary offsite storage solution, commercial recovery vendors that specialize in archival materials, your insurance company, a security company, a vacuum freeze drying company or a local freezer facility, your utility companies, electrician, a plumber, and a locksmith, and HVAC companies. In addition to that external call list, there should be also a roles list. This will list who is in what role in an emergency and what that role entails. The key player will be, for this call list, will be the emergency commander, who will lead the whole endeavor. This person is most critical, and there should always be an emergency commander, no matter how big or small your institution. There should also be an alternate in case that person is not available. The emergency commander, like I said, is going to be in charge of everything. So having someone that knows that they'll be ready to take charge, that have the personality and ability to do so, but then also someone who can step up to the role if they're not available is key. There should also be a designated person who is tasked with speaking with any vendors or emergency responders. There should be a person in charge of keeping all staff informed on the situation as well. It can be very overwhelming for one person, the emergency commander, to have to do, apologies, to do all this themselves. So being able to delegate things like being able to tell staff to not come in for the day or to come in and help with mitigation, that's really helpful to give that to a separate individual, and they can keep track of staff's changing contact information. A safety officer should also be involved, and that person would be in charge of ensuring both the safety of the staff and the collections throughout the salvaging process. Next slide. Speaking of the salvaging process, the next part of the preparedness plan is your salvage priorities and procedures. This includes both the general procedures and the salvage instructions for specific media. No matter what the emergency is, it is important to set salvage priorities for what to save first. While this can feel very difficult, like choosing a favorite child, these decisions should be made so that in an event of an emergency, there will not be a delay in action due to staff disagreeing about what to grab. Items I recommend as of highest priority might shock you, but is the essential records of the institution, such as payroll, accounts payable, and legal documents. Nowadays, most of these are done online, but even a virtual emergency is a possibility, so making sure they are accessible is essential. It may feel like you're putting yourself first in front of things you see as more valuable, especially since you agreed to be a steward and protector of your collections. But without essential institutional records, it will severely delay getting the institution back on its feet. Once you ensure that those business recovery information is secured, then you can determine which collections are of highest priority for your institution. Typical criteria include mission critical records, unique or heavily used collections, items with legal retention requirements, collections with scholarly research value or monetary value, formats that are particularly vulnerable to damage or are fragile, and materials on loan from other institutions. The primary goal when salvaging is to stabilize the collections as soon as possible. I have included here this item that's called a conservogram. This is from the National Park Service. These are very good for knowing what to do with specific media. I am not a conservator, so I decided not to go into that in this webinar, but I highly recommend looking at those because they will tell you a lot of specifics about what to do if, say, a paper-based collection and photographs get wet, what to do when there's fire damage to items. All right, next slide. Excuse me. In your plan, you should also think about long-term recovery. This portion will outline what to do when materials need extensive conservation. Questions that should be answered include, where will they go and how will the work be paid for? This section will also explain where staffs can be relocated to do their work if the building is unavailable for them. There is also, finally, in your disaster response plan, you should have some appendices. This can include as many things as you want. One of the items that I recommend you have is your insurance plan with whoever your insurance company is, having that plan readily available when you just grab your plan and leave. That's really helpful, I find. All right, next slide. Now, you've completed your response plan. That took forever, right? Trust me, it will take even longer to actually write, but let's keep going on. When you get to sit back and enjoy your work, now you will get to sit back and enjoy your work, excuse me, because the next two stages don't actually happen unless an emergency occurs. So it can take 2 years, 10 years, hopefully never, for you to actually put this plan into action. But when an emergency or disaster does occur, then you would go into stage 3, which is response. Like I said, the stage only happens in the event of an emergency. This is the stage that occurs with the impetus of an emergency, but before you actually jump into any action. Of highest priority is always staff safety. So you have to make sure that your location is safe for your staff before you make any other decisions. If the emergency involves requires the involvement of first responders, everything else will have to wait until they clear the site to be safe. It is not up to you to decide, it is up to first responders to decide. Once it has been deemed safe for staff to enter, then they can begin the process of response. To begin, the emergency commander that I had mentioned a few times before needs to be notified ASAP. They are the ones who will be making all of the decisions, and they will need to take over the situation. It would be their job to assess what has happened and to what level you need to respond. It is also their job to do reconnaissance before any other staff gets involved. They will be in charge of making the decisions for an appropriate game plan that meets the needs of the situation. They should write down all the steps and decisions made during this stage, from the initial report of the disaster, the assessment, and the intended game plan. The main goal of this game plan will be to get the records to safety and to stabilize the records. Getting the records to safety can look like many different things, especially depending on the severity of the issue and if it is localized or not. A leaky pipe dripping on a section of records would only require you to relocate the impacted records and the ones adjoining and in danger, whereas a massive water exposure that impacts the whole collection would require the use of the priority list. If items need to be sent off-site, a step-by-step plan for how to transport the items will need to be drawn up. And the plan for stabilizing the records will again be contingent on what you're dealing with. What items will need to be dried and possibly frozen for 48 hours to prevent mold growth, Records exposed to smoke and soot will need to be aired out. The emergency commander should use the knowledge gained from creating the disaster plan to inform their decisions about how to stabilize these different material types. Also, contacting the appropriate vendors and recovery contacts immediately will ensure a smoother recovery process. When everyone is ready and has been communicated a specific plan and they know their expected roles in the matter, beginning the physical recovery of the items will be that much faster and smoother. Additionally, this plan should include what supplies are needed from the emergency supply list and if any additional supplies need to be purchased. At this stage, strong leadership is key. Next slide. Right. So once the plan is in place, then you can actually start the activity of recovery. You will be stepping into a recovery site where things may look and feel different from your typical workday. Making sure the team is emotionally ready to engage with the aftermath of a large disaster incident will help keep your team safe. Seeing the aftermath of, say, a major fire can be shocking and lead to grief. So be ready for the emotional impact, not just the physical after a disaster. Once people are acclimated, the physical work can then begin. There should be individuals assigned to security of the site, especially if items are being relocated to a different place. Recovery teams can include volunteers beyond your staff. So these security personnel can ensure that only the people that are supposed to be there are there. You can decide how your team will work together to complete the assigned objectives. Maybe you perform actions in teams, maybe you form an assembly line. It's up to you and how your team works best and what the unique needs of the situation call for. But someone should be writing down an account of everything, both from your actions down to what items are actually damaged, and which would include the medium or type of material, as well as the extent and level of damage and where it is going. Photos are always a good idea. This will then help you triage which materials need to go where and receive their unique treatment. This list of impacted materials will help you retain control over the recovery process. There will also likely be both damaged and undamaged materials present. Your inventory of items can include undamaged materials, especially if they need to be relocated, but don't need any further action. It's easy to get confused or later forget what went where after the adrenaline of the recovery process is complete, so this list will be your backup. Along with the goal of getting records safe and stable, there should be a parallel goal of restoring business services. It can be easy to put reopening on the back burner when you feel like you're being pulled in so many different directions. And it is important to take as much time as required to face those other challenges. But there should be discussions about the feasibility and timeline of reopening. And finally, once the initial salvage activities are complete, then you can determine if long-term rehabilitation is needed. Any type of disaster occurs costs, but long-term rehabilitation can become very expensive. Having a plan in place for how to pay for it will ensure that you don't lose conservation services. Getting back to normal can take years depending on the severity of the disaster, and things might not actually look the same. Ongoing communication with community and service providers will help keep your needs in front of people. Disasters can retroactively be a way to reinforce archives' importance in a community. Stakeholders, organizations, and others may rise to the occasion and help rebuild things better. And at the very least, a disaster is an opportunity to learn, reflect, and improve future responses. Next slide. Tackling all that I just went over can feel very daunting, but you're not doing it alone or from scratch. There are many free resources out there that you can use as templates and guidance. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Actually, there's literally a wheel you can buy from the foundation of the American Institute of Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works to help you with this. The National Park Service, like I said before, came out with conservograms that can help you guide you with planning how to handle different media types made out of varying materials. I highly recommend. Topics include textiles, natural history, organic materials, and inorganic, paper-based versus non-paper-based. Like I said, I made the decision not to go into these different media types as I'm not a trained conservator, but I recommend you look at those and also look out for your local conservator and get in touch with them because you might need them in the future. Some of these other resources I recommend you look at, like I said before, they will be on the YouTube version of this presentation later. That's all I got for you.
Great. So we'll do questions in just a second, if anybody has any. I just want to go over what our next webinars are. And all of the resources that Brittany mentioned on this slide, I'm going to put in the YouTube. So we always record these and put them on YouTube, and I will put it in the YouTube description of the video, so you can click on them there. So our next webinar is going to be on archives basics, and I know that that's kind of ambiguous name, but it's like, let's say you get a new job and you get like dumped in, or you're a volunteer and you get dumped into an archive somewhere. Kind of what do you do? What are first steps? And I think that's one of the questions that any archivist gets. If somebody, if their information gets passed along, it's something we get asked a lot. And so we're really hoping this can be like a really great 101. Or even, if there isn't, and that's like, like guessing how the collection was arranged before, or how do we start arranging a collection. And then Brittany is going to go over record life cycle. So how do we label active and inactive papers? Like what creates, like what's different from a record that we use every day, like my notes versus what's actually archival. And again, this is our YouTube channel. It's just Backlog Archivists, and this video will be up there later this week. And if anybody has any questions, again, this is just kind of like an overview. What should you have in your disaster plan? Feel free to go ahead and unmute, and we'll wait just a second if anybody wants to. And we don't have a chat tonight, so you have to unmute. I'm sorry. And then we're also just starting to put together our 2026 our webinars. And so Brittany in a past life was a knowledge manager, so like more active records. And so she's going to do kind of an overview of what that is. Because, there's knowledge management, there's records management, and then archives, and just kind of getting to know like all the different facets of library information science. And then she's also going to do one on archives and museum loans in February. Because that's something that we come across in a lot of projects, like we have this, like, should there be insurance around loans? What kind of paperwork should be around loans? A lot of places we work with, they're working on handshake agreements, which isn't always the safest thing to do. As much as like we really do want to make like loans and sharing materials for exhibit purposes feasible, but we can just put like a little bit of a framework around it. So I think that's it for this evening. Thank you everybody for tuning in. And again, all the resources we will throw in I'll send it in the email, and then we'll also put it in the description of the video. So thank you guys.